My name is Greg Eckerman. For those of you that haven't met me in previous 1 hour retreats, um, when Marianne asked me to do this, it really kind of forced me to kind of take a look back over our grief journey over the last 9 years, 9+ years, and it's kind of a blessing to do that. It's you don't think that revisiting one of the most difficult things you've survived in your life would have such positive implications. But I I I think about a quote from Soren Kierkegaard that says, hopefully I get this right, that life is only understood backwards, but it can only be lived forward. And and so let me start by telling some of our story backward. I will never forget that moment. Um, and I think you all know the moment I'm talking about, the moment that I first learned that Eric was gone. I was driving in my car and taking our middle son, our special needs son, Joey, and his best friend, Timmy, out for lunch. Marianne, it was an early lunch. Marianne had gone to take Eric out to breakfast because he'd been having a really rough time. And as I'm driving along, I get a call and I see it's from Marianne. So I answer it, and before I can even get the hi honey out, I just hear this wail. He's dead. He's dead. And that's the moment that my life took a pivot. That I knew in that microsecond that life would never be the same again. That a lot of the things that I had held, the beliefs that you know that our family was above that somehow that this is something that tragic could never truly come into our lives, all of that was blown away. So I knew that my life would never be the same. Our lives would never be the same. And I was right. I was right. As I look back before that, we'd gone through years of struggle with Eric. Started with an injury that he experienced in high school as a senior, a wrestler, broke a small bone in his wrist, and it left him with chronic pain and partial loss of function in his right hand. He's right-handed, of course. I say, of course, because somehow it just seemed like it had to have the most impact. And so we ultimately decided to try surgery to fix it, and that just made things worse. And so ultimately, again, we tried another surgery and another and another. Ultimately, over the course of 7 years, Eric had 5 surgeries and came out of that with essentially unlimited access to prescription opioids. He transitioned from that to heroin, we learned later, when he was 23 years old. And ironically, it was a kid that we'd had to our house many times in the neighborhood. Our house was the neighborhood hangout. All the kids came over there, and we knew them all, and had them for dinner many times. And so it was just such a sad thing, and to know that somebody that we'd gotten that close to could bring this into our lives, into Eric's life. Eric fought the good fight. He went through rehab multiple times. We were with him every step of the way from the time that we learned that he was struggling with addiction, because we didn't know. Eric was always the cool kid. He was a really good athlete. He was charming. He was sort of a closet user, and he could pull it off. he had that kind of charisma that he fooled us. And so, but once he came to us and told us that he was struggling with addiction, with heroin addiction, we pulled out all the stops, and he tried hard. He had some extended periods of sobriety. Would always come out doing really well, really positive, and he was a bright kid. He would find a way. He'd get back into school. He'd get another job. Somehow it seemed like he was pulling things together, and our hopes would rise. And then something would happen and drag him back into that rabbit hole, and we'd come crashing down again. So it was hard on everybody, and I think hardest on Eric. He could never see himself as an addict, and I think each time he fell back into that, he lost a little heart, and until eventually, I think his fear of living and falling again became greater than his fear of dying, and so he decided to leave us. He took his own life. But as I look back at our grief journey, one of the things I realized is how our kids died is not the most important thing. It's the thing that gets our attention. It's the thing that requires us to strive to understand, even if it's beyond all comprehension at first. But healthy grieving involves learning to mourn. It involves sharing our stories and really saying their names and telling the story of their lives, the things that what I like to call their divine spark, probably more appropriately their soul, the things that make them so uniquely themselves. And Eric had that to an incredible degree. He just was always so alive and so vibrant. Eric is my stepson. He came into my life when he was 8 years old, and we have a blended family, 5 kids, my 2 daughters, and then suddenly I had 3 sons, and Eric is the youngest of all, and I think probably the biggest personality. He just always was all boy, and I just loved having that in my life, and so um, that's what we remember. So when I get to the other half of that Kierkegaard quote, that life can only be lived forwards, I think about what's happened since we lost Eric after the funeral and all of the turmoil, and we're left with just us. And I have to say, I I didn't know how to grieve. I had no clue how to do this. I tried a strategy of trying to push it away, threw myself into work, hoping that, the old adage, time heals all wounds. I was hoping that there was some truth to that. Um, there is none, not by itself anyway. But what I did learn is if you do the right things with your time, if you do the hard work, you can find healing, and it does take time. It takes time and hard work, the hardest work any of us will ever do, I believe. And so I lagged Marianne. Marianne really was kind of the pioneer in our family of trying to process her grief, trying to understand all of the turmoil that we were going through, and trying to understand if and how to survive this. And so she did the exploration, and I kind of followed in her path. At the end of that year, 2016 is when Eric died at the age of 27. He died in February 27th. You'll never forget that day, just like you'll never forget that moment where your life changed irrevocably. But it was at the end of that year Marianne found an article uh, in a Catholic publication that our sister-in-law had sent her, and it was just had a short blurb about the Emmaus ministry, and so she bundled herself up, and I sent her off. She flew to Boston in what she always refers to as the dead of winter, but she's an Arizona native, so she doesn't know how cold it can get. But it was in November in Boston, and I didn't hear from her for the whole weekend until she was flying back or in the airport on the way back. And it was transformative for her. She always says, I don't remember if I even said a word that whole weekend, but I know when she came back, the first message I got is, we need to do this. And so, of course, I just complied. I thought, well, I can facilitate this. I don't know what that means, but I'll be along for the ride. It was a year later that we did our first Emmaus retreat, and it was transformative for me. It was the first time that I'd ever told my story openly to a group of guys in the small group sharing, to a group of guys that I didn't know before that, or didn't know very well. We introduced ourselves, told this story in its rawest form, and it was such a release. It kind of opened my eyes to a set of possibilities that I didn't know existed. That there was a way, there was healing in being able to talk about this, and the rest of the weekend was wonderful for me. You know, one of the things that I've discovered is that, ironically, there are truly gifts in great loss like ours. And for us, part of that, one of the things I will always be grateful to Eric for, is that it allowed us to re-engage with our faith. Marianne and I were both cradle Catholics and had both kind of fallen away from the church, and me probably more than her by a long shot. And yet, when we lost Eric, the first thing that came to our minds is he in hell? You know, we were old enough that we grew up when that was sort of, I guess, sort of the understanding in the church, or at least my understanding of the church's position on suicide, and we couldn't get past that. And so, literally within a week, we went to see Father Peter at the Franciscan Renewal Center, which has become our faith home here in Phoenix, and he was just so gracious about it. Didn't really push to hear our whole story, because when we sat down with him, the only thing that we could get out was, is he in hell? And so, yeah, and so he helped us understand that, you know, Eric had his hell here on earth, and we didn't need to worry about it anymore. All of his struggles were behind him. He was, you know, he was in God's hands, and he was perfect. That, you know, all of those divine spark things that I love so much when we first met were what defined him, and so it has reopened our faith. It has allowed us to connect. The Emmaus ministry has been such a huge part of that. We have, you know, one of the one of the things that you experience, one of the losses, the sort of ancillary losses that happens with losses like ours, when a parent loses a child, it is so disorienting. It is so humbling. Um, but one of and there are so many peripheral sort of, not, I don't mean to say, makes them sound lesser, but there are so many ripple effect losses that you don't think about. One of them, I often, and for us was certainly true, is a loss of some of the things that we used to consider priorities in our lives. You know, we were both professional people. We both worked really hard. We both thought that was really important, and that somehow that would be a source of validation for us. And suddenly, it didn't matter. And um, so that opens the opportunity then to figure out what does matter, to find out where you might find meaning and purpose in your life again. And so it, I consider that among those blessings that I mentioned, because there's a certain empowerment in that. For us, the way that played out is we created an organization to support people bereaved by substance abuse and suicide. And it's called Eric's House. We named it in Eric's honor. And um, we do Zoom-based support for people all across North America, and we do that as peers in loss. We're not counselors, we're not psychologists. Certainly, we're just people who have had losses that allow us to kind of relate to the people that we work with, and that truly has been another of the blessings. I think we find healing when we are able to reach out to people in need of healing, and we're able to be part of their effort to find that their new meaning and purpose, to reconcile themselves to their loss. And it has been truly a gift for us. Um, we still do the Emmaus retreats. We just did them on a couple of weeks ago. I love doing them in the Easter season, and now as the Easter season is drawing to a close, we can kind of reflect on that, because obviously the Emmaus story fits in so beautifully into that narrative, but also because it there's such a powerful reminder of the resurrection and that promise that we just prayed for, that we will be reunited with our children. And that is truly a godsend. So I am so grateful. I'm sure Diane remembers that first retreat that we did, because Diane and Charlie both came out, and they were probably wondering what they'd gotten into with me, because I had no idea what I was doing. I thought I was going to be like the roadie and just be behind the scenes and make sure that the equipment worked, and if anything needed to be lifted or moved, I could do that. And then all of a sudden, no, you don't get to be a passive participant in this. You're going to be right in the middle of it, and I'm so grateful that I was. So I'm gonna end our recording, and we can open it